Cuba is a vibrant island nation in the Caribbean and has a very complex history that has been influenced by the rise of Fidel Castro to power. Castro, who is deemed as a revolutionary leader and political icon, assumed power in Cuba through a series of events that climaxed to the Cuban Revolution of 1959. The revolution marked a major milestone in Cuban history and had profound implications for the broader geopolitical landscape and for the country itself. As Castro assumed power, he ushered in a new era of socialist governance that has set the stage for political, economic, and social transformation in the country. The revolution expanded healthcare, education, and racial and cultural equality for all. This is my presentation on Cuban Castro, the impact of the revolution by Xavier Knowles. The political reality of Cuba, like the United States, tells a story of a free market health. Unlike the United States, tells the story of a free market healthcare system where the government is not responsible for the well-being of its people. The article by Farouk says, and I'm going to quote this article, the U.S. has industrialized healthcare and transformed it into a multi-billion-dollar industry focused on profit rather than patient care. It needs to also invest in providing access to education for medical students and incentivize to be involved in community healthcare. However, in the communist country of Cuba, where the government is responsible for providing healthcare to its citizens, the universal healthcare system has flourished and benefited all Cuban residents. Cuba is also considered to have one of the highest healthcare qualities around the world. And we can see currently in Cuba, they have so many doctors, so many nurses, so many allied health professionals that Cuba is now trying to export those allied health professionals to other countries in the world. So they have an industry of exporting manpower to countries like the Bahamas, other Caribbean countries like Barbados, Jamaica, even as far as Dubai. Cuba has a program where they are partnering with countries to assist by providing manpower for their healthcare systems. Currently in the world, especially in the US, Canada, and so forth, there is a shortage of nurses. So those countries are recruiting nurses from countries like the Bahamas and Caribbean countries, or wherever they can find qualified nurses to come to their country and take part. Around 10 years after the revolution launched, the Rural Medical Service to improve the medical coverage in rural areas of the country began. This program employed over 750 physicians and medical students to ensure that Cubans living in rural areas or coastal communities had access to health care and improving disease prevention. Shortly after this, the Declaration of Alma-Ata established polyclinics in communities around Cuba. By the 90s, the program has impacted over 95% of the population, although access to universal health care came to fruition. However, it did not come free. It was one of the many things that came with the social agreement of the revolution that included extracting the surplus value of workers' wages. What we see in Cuba is that Cuba's system is where they forfeit per se a huge part of their salary. And the government then provides all of the needs of Cubans while in Cuba. So healthcare, education, anything that can be considered a need, even in terms of food, the government will provide the basic needs of all Cubans. As we touch Education, we're looking at a photo of Fidel Castro, and we'll talk about education. All levels of education are important to Cubans, and post the revolution, the government invested significantly in ensuring that its population received quality education, especially at the tertiary level. By 1992, over 33 years after the revolution, there were over 600,000 students that graduated from Cuban tertiary institutions. This was a clear indication that one in every Cubans were educated through the tertiary system. During 1992 to 1993, over 23% of the national budget was invested into education. This helped to support almost 15,000 teachers who were studying to upgrade their teaching skills. In addition, this also assisted over 11,000 students from 44 different countries who came to study in Cuba. By 1999, student enrollment at all education levels rose to 2.3 million. The comparative educational study of Latin American countries that same year showed that Cuba ranked as number one in language and mathematics in primary level schools. There were efforts to address the racial and cultural inequalities in Cuba by Fidel Castro. The country had deep racial and socio-economic disparities because power and wealth were held by the elite white Cubans, while Afro-Cubans were discriminated against. Afro-Cubans were now allowed to participate in the political process and to access opportunities, education, and careers like everyone else. The cultural inequalities existed when Cuban arts, music, and literature that were produced by the white Cubans were the only ones recognized by the state. However, Castro ensured that cultural institutions were established to support Cuban culture from all ethnic backgrounds. And we can see that based during my analysis of Cuba and the revolution and Fidel, and also based on personal experience from visiting Cuba, we can see that Cubans, majority of Cubans benefit from Cuba's system. So there were persons that are getting educated, were at universities in Cuba. Like I mentioned, there were persons who were a part of the medical industry, whether in allied health or as a nurse or doctor, a dentist, and so much other. And because of the low cost of to produce or to provide services in Cuba, there's a healthcare tourism based industry that was created, where people are now going to Cuba to get some of that world class healthcare, even though Cuba doesn't have the world class infrastructure to provide that healthcare. So we see that Cuba, because of the revolution and because of Fidel Castro's vision for Cuba, you see more persons coming to Cuba to access healthcare, coming to Cuba to even just experience the historical significance of the country and basically the infrastructure that still exists. They're still using older model of vehicles on the island. You're still seeing, like I said, infrastructure that exists pre-revolution, and you're still getting that authentic Cuban experience that is not influenced in any major way by the Western world. And that is one of the things that has allowed Cuba to more or less flourish over these past years, especially post-revolution. And so there are many different ideas about Fidel Castro, whether he is a dictator or if he's just really a communist that had a dream to provide more access to Cuba. But we realize that their system of democracy doesn't allow true democracy. However, it will only take the Cuban people and maybe another revolution to to change that.